When lightning struck thunder, the tragedy over North Africa. It began with a sky that looked almost too peaceful for war. March 1943. The North African coast lay beneath a thin blanket of golden light, stretching across the early morning clouds like molten copper. The horizon glowed in soft amber, painting shadows across endless miles of sand and stone. Beneath that deceptive calm, something was stirring. The sound came first, a low, distant hum. Then another. And another. Until the entire desert seemed to vibrate with mechanical thunder. Dozens of B-17 flying fortresses were rising from their makeshift airfields that morning, their four Wright Cyclone engines roaring to life in synchronized fury. Each bomber weighed 30 tons fully loaded. Each carried a crew of 10 young men, boys, really, with clean-shaven faces, photographs tucked into breast pockets, and hearts trained to stay steady under fire. Their target was straightforward by wartime standards, a German-Italian supply depot located 60 miles inland. Intelligence suggested it was a critical logistics hub, fuel, ammunition, spare parts. Take it out, and you disrupt the enemy's ability to fight. Slow their advance. By time for Allied troops pushing across Tunisia, it was routine. Or as routine as war could ever be. But nothing about that morning would stay routine. Act 1, the setup. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand the chaos of the North African campaign. By March 1943, the Allies were pushing German and Italian forces into an ever-shrinking pocket along the Tunisian coast. Rommel's Afrika Korps was in retreat, but still dangerous. The desert was a battlefield of heat, dust, supply lines stretched to breaking, and skies filled with competing aircraft. Communication was a nightmare. Radio interference was constant, sandstorms disrupted frequencies, overlapping Allied transmissions created confusion, and German jamming efforts made reliable contact nearly impossible. Pilots often flew entire missions without hearing a single clear transmission from base. Recognition was even worse. Allied pilots carried pocket-sized identification charts showing the silhouettes of friendly and enemy aircraft. In perfect visibility, they worked well. But in combat, with glare, haze, smoke, speed, and adrenaline, identifying an aircraft correctly could be nearly impossible. And that morning, visibility would be anything but perfect. Inside the lead B-17, First Lieutenant Robert Collins was hunched over his navigation table, double-checking coordinates. Collins was 22 years old, promoted just 3 weeks earlier after his predecessor was killed during a raid over Sicily. He carried himself with the quiet seriousness of a man who knew his decisions could guide, or doom, dozens of lives. "Course steady at 185 degrees, he called out to the pilot. Captain Edward Hale nodded from the cockpit. Hale was 30, an eternity in bomber command. He'd flown 27 missions and survived them all through a combination of skill, caution, and luck. He trusted Collins, but he trusted his instruments more. Behind them, Tech Sergeant Alan Murray sat at the radio station, headset pressed tight against his ears, adjusting frequencies with practiced fingers. "Still nothing from base," Murray muttered, frowning. "Just static, heavy static." It wasn't unusual. But Murray had flown enough missions to know when static felt normal and when it felt wrong. This felt wrong. "Keep trying," Collins said without looking up. Outside, the formation was tightening. 12 B-17s in total, stacked in tight combat box formation, a defensive pattern designed to maximize overlapping fields of fire from their .50 caliber machine guns. If enemy fighters attacked, the bombers could protect each other. But they weren't expecting enemy fighters. Not this early. Not this far from enemy airfields. 12,000 feet above them, a completely different mission was unfolding. Far from the bomber formation, high above the shimmering desert heat, another group of American aircraft was already patrolling the sky, 8 P-38 Lightnings, the twin-boom, twin-engine fighters nicknamed fork-tailed devils by the Germans who feared them. They were the cutting edge of Allied air power, sleek, deadly, capable of speeds over 400 miles per hour. Armed with 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, a P-38 could shred enemy bombers in seconds. Their leader was Captain William Bill Harrington, a veteran with 32 combat missions under his belt. Harrington had shot down 3 enemy aircraft, 2 Messerschmitts and a Mackay, and earned a reputation as a calm, decisive commander. But even Harrington was cautious that morning. The visibility was poor. A thin layer of atmospheric haze combined with the rising sun created a backlit glare that turned everything into silhouettes. Radio contact with base had been intermittent for the past hour. And intelligence had warned them that German Heinkel He-111 bombers might be operating in the area. The Heinkels were a real threat, medium bombers capable of devastating Allied supply columns and troop positions. If they got through, men would die. Harrington's orders were clear: intercept and destroy any enemy bombers before they reached Allied lines. Stay sharp, he called to his wingmen. Keep your eyes open. One of his pilots, Lieutenant Jack Turner, was flying tight formation off Harrington's left wing. Turner was 20 years old, fresh-faced, eager, still excited by the speed and power of the P-38. "Copy that, sir," Turner replied. They circled, waiting. Watching. Act 2, the convergence. At 0847 hours, the two formations were 15 miles apart, on converging flight paths. Neither group knew the other existed. Inside the B-17s, the crews were settling into the monotonous rhythm of flight, engines droning, vibrations constant, cold air seeping through gaps in the fuselage. Gunners scanned the sky out of habit, but most expected an uneventful flight. Private Henry Lawson, the ball turret gunner, rotated his turret slowly, checking the mechanism. The ball turret was a cramped glass sphere hanging beneath the bomber, barely large enough for a man to curl up inside. It was claustrophobic, freezing, and terrifying, but it offered a 360-degree view of the sky below. Lawson was 19. He'd lied about his age to enlist. "Anything down there, Lawson?" Collins asked over the intercom. "Negative. Just sand." "Keep watching." In the nose compartment, Lieutenant Paul Riggs, the bombardier, was cleaning his bomb sight, a complex instrument that would guide their bombs to the target. Riggs was meticulous, obsessive even. He treated the bomb sight like a sacred object. 15 minutes to target, Collins announced. "Roger," Riggs replied. Everything felt routine. Above them, Harrington was growing uneasy. The radio silence bothered him. Normally, by this point in the patrol, they'd have received at least 2 or 3 updates from ground control, enemy positions, weather changes, mission adjustments. But this morning, nothing. Just static. "Turner, anything on your radio?" Harrington asked. "Negative, sir. Dead air." Harrington frowned. He considered turning back, returning to base to clarify the situation. But orders were orders. If enemy bombers were inbound and he abandoned his patrol. "All aircraft, maintain patrol pattern," he ordered. Then, at 0851 hours, Turner's voice crackled through the radio. "Multiple aircraft, 2 o'clock low." Harrington snapped his head in that direction. At first, he saw nothing. Then, faint silhouettes. Tiny shapes glinting in the sunlight, barely visible through the morning haze. A formation. Large. Multi-engine. Harrington's pulse quickened. He grabbed his binoculars, trying to focus through the glare. "Can you ID them?" he asked. "Negative, sir. Too much haze. But they're big. 4 engines, maybe." Harrington checked his aircraft identification chart, the one pasted inside his cockpit. He'd memorized it, but in moments like this, he always double-checked. Heinkel He-111, twin-engine bomber. Wingspan approximately 74 feet. Distinctive glazed nose. B-17 Flying Fortress, 4-engine bomber. Wingspan 103 feet. But from certain angles. The problem was the angle. The unknown aircraft was silhouetted directly against the rising sun, backlit in brilliant, blinding light. All Harrington could see were dark shapes, outlines, shadows. "Could they be B-17s?" another pilot, Lieutenant Mike Brennan, asked. "B-17s should be nowhere near this sector," Harrington replied. "Last briefing said all heavy bombers were grounded for maintenance today." That information was wrong. But Harrington didn't know that. Inside the lead B-17, no one had yet noticed the fighters approaching from above. Captain Hale was focused on maintaining formation. Collins was recalculating their approach vector. Murray was still trying to raise base on the radio. Everything felt normal. The distance closed. 5 miles. 4. Harrington tried his radio again. "Unidentified aircraft, this is Lightning Leader. Identify yourself." "Over." "Static." He tried again. "Unidentified aircraft, you are approaching Allied airspace. Identify immediately or we will engage." "Over." Still nothing. Turner's voice was tense now. "Sir, they are heading directly toward our ground positions. If those are Heinkels and we don't stop them." Harrington knew the consequences. Heinkel bombers had devastated Allied positions before, fuel dumps exploding, ammunition convoys destroyed, men killed before they even saw the aircraft that killed them. But protocol demanded positive identification. He stared through his canopy, squinting against the glare. Twin-tailed? No, 4 engines? Maybe. The silhouette was all wrong in this light. Sir, we need to decide, Brennan said. Harrington's mind raced. Every second brought the unknown aircraft closer to Allied lines. If they were enemy bombers and he hesitated, men would die. If they were friendly aircraft and he attacked. He pushed the thought away. All P-38s, this is Lightning Leader, Harrington said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. Prepare for attack run. We engage on my mark. Act 3, the attack. At 0854 hours, the P-38s rolled into their attack dive. 8 fighters, engines screaming, descending like silver hawks toward the unsuspecting formation below. Inside the lead B-17, Tail Gunner Staff Sergeant Vincent Caruso was the first to spot them. Fighters. 2 o'clock high. The intercom exploded with voices. What kind? Can't tell, too much sun. Are they ours? Caruso grabbed his binoculars, hands shaking slightly as he tried to focus on the diving shapes. They're twin boom. Could be P-38s. Then why are they diving on us? The question hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then the sky erupted. Streams of .50 caliber traces poured from the P-38s like burning rain, slashing through the air in bright, deadly arcs. The 20mm cannons thumped, sending explosive rounds spiraling toward the bombers. The first burst hit the lead B-17's right wing. Metal skin shredded like paper. Sparks exploded in brilliant showers. A fuel line ruptured, and liquid fire began spreading across the wing surface. Captain Hale felt the impact like a physical blow. What the? Are those lightnings? They are firing on us. Collins screamed. Our own fighters are firing on us. Hale yanked the control yoke hard left, banking desperately as another burst of fire raked across the fuselage. Oxygen masks rattled. Equipment flew loose. The bomber shuddered violently, metal groaning under stress. Behind them, the second B-17 in formation took direct hits to its tail section. The vertical stabilizer disintegrated in a shower of debris. The rear gunner, Sergeant James Mitchell, screamed as hot shrapnel tore through the compartment, slicing across his leg and shoulder. I'm hit. I'm hit. Hold on, Mitchell. The bomber lurched sideways, barely controllable. In the radio compartment, Murray was shouting into his microphone, desperate. Friendly aircraft. Friendly aircraft. Cease fire. We are American. Repeat, we are United States Army Air Forces. Abort attack. But his transmission vanished into the same wall of static that had plagued them all morning. The P-38s heard nothing. Harrington pulled up from his first pass, banking hard into the sun. Good hits on the lead aircraft, Turner reported, his voice sharp with adrenaline. Saw flames on the right wing. Copy. Break and come around for second pass, Harrington ordered. They banked sharply, repositioning for another attack run. Inside Harrington's chest, something felt wrong, a tightening, a flicker of doubt that he couldn't quite name. But he pushed it aside. Combat left no room for hesitation. Inside the bombers, chaos was everywhere. Why the hell are P-38s shooting at us? They can't see our markings. Send flares. Recognition flares. Collins grabbed the flare pistol and fired through the side window, a bright red flare arcing into the sky, the universal signal to cease fire on friendly aircraft. But from the P-38's angle, backlit by the sun and obscured by haze, the flare was barely visible. Second pass. Harrington called. Weapons free. The fighters dove again. Tracer rounds sliced through the air like burning threads, stitching patterns of destruction across the bomber formation. The ball turret gunner, Lawson, rotated desperately, trying to track the attackers. But his turret mechanism jammed, damaged by the first pass. I can't move. I'm stuck. Smoke began filling the small glass sphere. Lawson pounded on the emergency release, panic rising. Get me out of here. Above him, in the cockpit, warning lights blazed across the instrument panel like red lightning. Engine 3's on fire. Feather the prop. Oil pressure dropping. We're losing altitude. Hale fought the controls, muscles straining as he tried to keep the massive bomber level. But with one engine dead and another damaged, the B-17 was barely controllable. Another burst of P-38 fire tore through the nose compartment. The bombardier's glass nose shattered like a crystal explosion. Fragments of plexiglass blasted inward, razor-sharp, moving at lethal velocity. Lieutenant Riggs, bent over his bomb sight, didn't even have time to scream. Debris sliced across his face and throat. He slumped forward, blood pouring onto the instrument panel, his hands still gripping the bomb sight. Paul. Paul. Collins unbuckled, lunging forward to grab him. Stay with me. Stay with me, Paul. But Riggs wasn't moving. Above, Harrington came around for another pass. As he lined up his sights, the sun shifted slightly, the angle changed, and for just a moment, one brief, terrible moment, the light hit the wing of the lead bomber differently. And he saw it. A dark blue circle with a white star. The star and bar insignia of the United States Army Air Forces. Harrington's blood turned to ice. Hold fire. Hold fire. Break off. They're ours. But the message reached only half his squadron. Lieutenant Brennan, focused entirely on his attack run, fired a long burst along the fuselage of the 3rd B-17. The rounds tore through the aluminum skin like it was tissue paper, ripping open the radio compartment in a violent explosion of sparks and shredded metal. Sergeant Murray, still holding his microphone, was thrown backward by the impact. His headset ripped free. Blood sprayed across the radio equipment. He hit the bulkhead and collapsed, unconscious. The radio behind him hissed, sparked once, then died completely. Inside Harrington's cockpit, the truth hit like a physical blow. Dear God, they're B-17s, he whispered. They're ours. His hands trembled on the stick. All aircraft, cease fire. Cease fire immediately. They are friendly. Repeat, friendly aircraft. The P-38s broke off, pulling up sharply, circling in confusion and disbelief. Below them, the B-17 formation was shattered. Bombers burning, trailing smoke, struggling to maintain altitude. But they weren't crashing. Not yet. Not if their crews could help it. Act 4, the aftermath. For the next 40 minutes, 12 damaged B-17s fought their way back to base, engines burning, hydraulics failing, crews bleeding. Captain Hale, his face covered in sweat and his hands locked on the controls, wrestled the lead bomber through the sky. With one engine dead and another running rough, the aircraft was losing altitude at 50 feet per minute. We need to lighten the load, he said through gritted teeth. Dump the bombs. Collins ordered. They released their entire payload over empty desert, tons of explosives falling harmlessly into sand, and the bomber lifted slightly, buying precious altitude. Behind them, the rest of the formation followed, jettisoning everything they could. And above them, the P-38s flew in silent escort. Harrington positioned his fighters around the wounded bombers, not as attackers this time, but as protectors, as guardians. He couldn't bring himself to speak. Inside the bombers, gunners watched through cracked glass and blood-stained canopies as the same fighters that had nearly killed them now flew beside them like angels. No one spoke. The silence was crushing. When the formation finally reached their airfield at 1,037 hours, emergency crews were already waiting. Medics rushed forward as the bombers touched down, engines smoking, tires blown, fuselages riddled with hundreds of bullet holes. They pulled Lieutenant Riggs from the nose compartment first. He was still alive, barely. Blood soaked his flight suit. His face was unrecognizable. Sergeant Murray was carried out on a stretcher, unconscious but breathing. Sergeant Mitchell, the tail gunner, limped down the ladder with help, his leg wrapped in a tourniquet made from someone's belt. Lawson, the ball turret gunner, had to be cut free from his jammed turret. When they finally extracted him, he was shaking so badly he couldn't stand. In total, 4 men were critically wounded. 7 more had minor injuries, shrapnel wounds, cuts from flying glass, burns. Miraculously, no one died. But the bombers themselves were destroyed, so heavily damaged that half of them would never fly again. Across the airfield, Harrington's P-38s landed one by one. The pilots climbed out slowly, moving like men in a nightmare. Harrington's legs felt weak as he walked toward the bomber crews. His face was pale, his eyes red. Around him, bomber crewmen stood in small groups, bruised, bandaged, furious, confused. Some glared at the approaching fighter pilots. Some just stared. Captain Hale stepped forward. His flight suit was torn, his hands still trembling. Harrington stopped 3 feet away. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Harrington's voice broke the silence, barely a whisper. We thought you were Heinkel's. His voice cracked. We tried calling. The radios, there was static. We didn't know. Hale stared at him. Not with anger. Not with hatred. With something worse. Understanding. Our radios were dead too, Hale said quietly. The 2 men stood in silence. Around them, the airfield seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Hale extended his hand. Harrington stared at it, stunned. Then he took it, shaking, tears running down his face. "I'm sorry," Harrington whispered. "God forgive me, I'm so sorry." "War did this," Hale said. "Not you." But Harrington would carry the weight for the rest of his life. The official investigation took 3 weeks. What they discovered was a cascade of failures, human error, broken communication, and the fog of war combining into tragedy. The P-38s had been briefed that all B-17 missions were cancelled that day due to maintenance issues. That briefing was wrong. Updated orders had been issued, but never reached Harrington's squadron due to radio interference. The B-17s had been given a flight path that should have kept them far from active fighter patrols. But a navigation error, a single degree of deviation, compounded over miles, had brought them directly into the P-38's patrol zone. The radios had failed on both sides due to a combination of atmospheric conditions and unintentional jamming from Allied ground transmitters. And the visibility, the haze, the glare, the sun, had made visual identification nearly impossible. No one was officially blamed. But everyone involved felt responsible. Lieutenant Riggs survived, but lost sight in his left eye and carried scars across his face for the rest of his life. Sergeant Murray recovered from his injuries but suffered hearing loss that would plague him for decades. Sergeant Mitchell kept his leg, but walked with a limp forever after. The psychological wounds ran deeper. Epilogue, reconciliation. The incident was recorded in official reports, quietly, without publicity. The military didn't want to advertise friendly fire incidents. They were bad for morale, bad for public relations. But those who lived through it never forgot. 4 years afterward, Harrington struggled with what he'd done. He completed his tour of duty, flew 15 more missions, and shot down 2 more enemy aircraft. But none of that mattered to him. All he could see were the B-17s, burning, falling, filled with men he'd sworn to protect. He left the Air Force in 1945 and returned home to Nebraska. He married, had children, built a quiet life. But he never spoke about the war. Not until 1968. That year, a veterans reunion brought together surviving airmen from the North African campaign. Harrington attended reluctantly, pressured by his wife who thought it might help him find peace. And there, across a crowded hotel ballroom, he saw Captain Edward Hale. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. Harrington froze. Hale saw him too. They stood 20 feet apart, separated by 2 decades and a memory neither could escape. Then Hale walked over. Harrington couldn't breathe. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Hale said. "I'm sorry," Harrington said immediately. "I'm so..." "Stop," Hale interrupted gently. "We've carried this long enough." He extended his hand again, just as he had 25 years before. "War makes enemies out of friends," Hale said quietly. "Peace lets them be brothers again." Harrington took his hand, and this time, he didn't let go. They embraced, 2 old men, crying in a hotel ballroom, while other veterans watched in respectful silence. Over the following years, more survivors from both groups reconnected. They shared stories, compared memories, helped each other heal. Some became close friends. One P-38 pilot became godfather to a B-17 gunner's grandson. Another pair wrote a book together about their experiences. They didn't forget what happened. But they forgave. The tragedy over North Africa became a case study in military training, a reminder of what can go wrong when communication fails, when visibility is poor, when assumptions replace verification. Modern military aircraft carry sophisticated identification friend or foe systems specifically designed to prevent incidents like this. But technology can't eliminate every risk. Human error, the chaos of combat, the fog of war, these are constants that no system can fully overcome. The men who flew that day, both the attackers and the attacked, became living reminders of an uncomfortable truth. In war, even the bravest can make mistakes. Even the most loyal can harm their own. Even the clearest skies can hide deadly shadows. The incident was never given an official name. But veterans called it the day lightning struck thunder. A day when brothers fought brothers. A day when the sky itself seemed to betray those who trusted it. A day that proved war's cruelest lesson. Sometimes the enemy isn't the one you're looking for. Sometimes the enemy is confusion, fear, assumption. And the only way to survive is to remember that even in the chaos, even in the heat of combat, even when everything seems clear, nothing ever is. In memory of all those who served, suffered, and survived the fog of war.